political persona who, speaking candidly, which I'm going to do, is a narcissist, extremely prickly, and unable to tolerate anyone who may be coming close to rivaling him for the limelight or for the affections of the British people. I've just been on talk radio with Julia Hartley-Brewer, who said, well, look, Ben, put your ego aside. Lowe needs to put his ego aside. Reform is Nigel Farage, and Nigel Farage is reform. And I completely agree with her on the latter point. And that's the point that needs to be addressed. You can't have a political party that wants to be in government, that has aspirations to be in government, being one man. Not only did Nigel not make it into the rotunda, he wasn't even met by Donald Trump. And nor did he meet Elon Musk. And as we all know, Elon Musk said Nigel wasn't the right man to lead reform. And I think if the body of people that I described were to emerge in some kind of coherent structure, then I'm certain it would have the support of the Trump administration.
Hello and welcome to the show. I'm Peter Whittle. Now, it's been a bit of a tumultuous week in politics, particularly if you are a reform supporter. I'm delighted, therefore, that we are speaking this week to Ben Habib, been on the channel many times before, obviously a former Brexit Party MEP, and indeed, until last year, was Deputy Leader of Reform. Ben, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
No, it's great to talk to you. Ben, can I just start by asking you, you, and most of the people who watch shows like this are on Twitter an awful lot, and they're on social media, and we all are extremely interested in politics. I noticed that there was a poll that came out today showing that when it comes to the story of the past week with Rupert Lowe, that in fact support for reform seems to be at the same level as it was before. Do you think that this is the kind of thing that just doesn't register so much with ordinary people out there in the country? Do you think this is a political, if you like, issue that excites us but not them?
Well, I think of the electorate and the speed at which information is shared amongst the electorate in a kind of pyramidal sense. So you've got at the top of the pyramid and towards the top of the pyramid people who are very politically engaged, like perhaps you and me, constantly on social media, analysing every last word that's spoken. And then as you get further down the pyramid, people are obviously less interested in politics and they want to get on with their lives, and rightly so, and they don't want to be bothered with the minutiae of, everyday blows between politicians. But I think when something seismic happens at the top of the pyramid, even though it may not be immediately understood or felt elsewhere in the electorate, it will seep out into it. The electorate psyche will become aware that things aren't quite right. And, I've been aware, perhaps I'm very close to the top of the reform pyramid at least, I've been very aware for a long time that there are serious issues with reform. And it took a while for people who are politically engaged now, I think they do see it now, for them to see it. But I think the notion that just because reform is doing well in the polls at the moment and this is going to be lost on the electorate, I think that would be a dangerous presumption for the leadership of reform to make, because I think it will seep into the psyche of the British people. They're not, one of the best things about the British people, and we know this from their voting to leave the EU, is that they really get it. They know what the issues are, and it may take a while longer for the information to get there, but they'll get there. And I think this is deeply damaging to reform, what's going on. Though I think the seeds of this were sown into reform, which we can, unpick during the course of this conversation.
Which you would say you're talking about the structural form of reform, aren't you?
Yeah. So, I've always focused on the structure. The structure for me, in any organization, is critical, getting the right structure, because if the organism isn't structured properly, the organism won't survive. But it's doubly important in an organism or organization like Reform, where you have, at least you have had since the 3rd of June 2024, one of the biggest political personas appointing himself leader, a political persona who, speaking candidly, which I'm going to do, is a narcissist, extremely prickly, and unable to tolerate anyone who may be coming close to rivaling him for the limelight or for the affections of the British people. And so when you've got someone as tall as that and as prickly as that, you've got to really have a good structure so that other people who are good don't fear joining the party, thinking that they're going to be set aside. That, of course, now that fear is going to loom very large in any people's minds who are thinking of joining Reform in any sort of serious capacity. Because they'll think, well, look at what happened to, I hope you don't mind me saying, so look at what happened to Ben Habib, look at what happened to Rupert Lowe, look at what happened to Howard Cox. When anyone gets popular, anyone has a view which marginally differs from Nigel, if they make any criticism of Nigel, they're out. Yeah. And so how will he how would he recruit Robert Jenrick if that's whom he wanted, or Suella Braverman, or indeed people like you, Peter, and others who have a very clear political ideology, who understand what's required to save the country, but wouldn't wish to join an organization which would set out not just then to set them aside, as they have done to myself and Rupert, but to damage. And in Rupert's case, I think they set out to destroy him on the way out. And, I would be very, very fearful if I was thinking of joining Reform now. And I think that's the beginning of the end of Reform. I've just been on talk radio with Julia Hartley-Brewer, who said, well, look, Ben, put your ego aside. Lowe needs to put his ego aside. Reform is Nigel Farage, and Nigel Farage is Reform. And I completely agree with her on the latter point. And that's the point that needs to be addressed. You can't have a political party that wants to be in government, that has aspirations to be in government, being one man, particularly when the country is in such trouble. We need multiple Samsons. We need multiple clear-thinking, capable people who understand the problems, who understand the solutions to the problems, and can articulate those solutions, and then enact the solutions. You need Samsons. All of them are going to rival Nigel, if not exceed Nigel, in their intellectual capacity and their capacity to, befriend the media and the electorate. And Nigel, if he were really in this for the country, would welcome them. But he doesn't. And that's a real problem.
Hello. Please excuse this brief interruption, but I'd be really grateful if you could please hit the subscribe button and subscribe to our channel. Our mission is vitally important, and we must grow this channel to ensure that our content reaches the biggest possible audience. The best way to do this is for you to subscribe. It's totally free. And in addition to subscribing, if you're able to donate or join our membership scheme, please click on the link in the description or visit our website, newcultureforum.org.uk. We've got great plans ahead, but we can't do it without your support. From only £4 per month, you'll receive a range of perks and benefits, including exclusive content. Thank you. You mentioned there actually, obviously your own case, Ben, but also going back quite a long way. And indeed, people have been popping up on the media this week, people like Stephen Wolfe, talking about people who've, as it were, come to grief under Nigel. Now, you could say, could you not, that actually this happened to many people, but Nigel is still here. Do you think this time that he's been sort of qualitatively differently damaged in some ways?
Yes, I do. There are two reasons I think he is going to find it much more difficult to recover from this than he has done in the past. The first is social media. And the ability for people who he has set aside to actually continue to have a voice. He can't control that now. In the past, there wasn't social media. Once they were removed from UKIP or whatever it was, they were sidelined. They didn't get any more interviews with the newspapers or the television channels, and that was the end of them. But now you can't silence people like me and Rupert. And Rupert in particular has a remarkable social media presence. I mean, it's phenomenal. He makes more money out of Twitter, more money out of X than Nigel does. And so he's not going to be silent. And the other thing I think that's different is that they have MPs now, which they've never had before. Rupert is an MP, and Rupert is a particularly good MP. He has asked many written questions. He bravely speaks in Parliament in a way, frankly, that his four erstwhile colleagues didn't. He asked the really seriously difficult questions, which in the mere asking of them in more normal times would have had him castigated as a racist. But he has the courage to ask those questions, and they need to be asked. And his erstwhile colleague didn't. And so Rupert's presence in the Commons is something Nigel can't cancel. And that's why I think they've been so vindictive with him. You know, reporting Rupert to the police, albeit on this ridiculously frivolous charge, as far as I can see, that he threatens Yusuf with, physical harm back in December 2024. I know the police said there's been a series of complaints, but I spoke to Rupert and says he hasn't even seen Zaya since then. So, to wait that long before you make a police complaint suggests to me Zaya didn't initially take it seriously. To make that complaint the day after the news story breaks where Rupert's calling out the party makes it pretty damn clear, I think, to any sane-minded individual that they've gone for Rupert. And, we mustn't underestimate the seriousness of reporting someone to the police. When you do that, what you're basically trying to do, or your ultimate aim, is to get them incarcerated. You want them to be put in prison. Otherwise, why would you? It's not that good. You wouldn't go to the police. And so that's what they've done to Rupert Lowe, a man who has beaten the drum for an independent, sovereign United Kingdom since the mid-90s, who has gone through his entire life, like Nigel, fighting for an independent, sovereign United Kingdom, and has stood shoulder to shoulder with Nigel. But he's come up against exactly the same problems that all the people that you've just mentioned have come up against, including myself. And Nigel has tried to set him aside and destroy him. And I think this is going to be very problematic for Nigel and the party going forward. The social media response is not going to abate, and therefore the media response is not going to abate because it's fed from social media. And Rupert ain't going anywhere because he's in the Commons, and he's a brave speaker in the Commons, so we'll all see him. And so I think Nigel's got a fundamental problem. Nigel had, I think, forgive me if I'm speaking for too long, but I think after this whole fracas blew up, and the police complaint went in, and that really misleading statement about bullying taking place in Rupert's offices, when Rupert wasn't even accused of being the bully, it was something else. But they made it look in the statement, Reform made it look as if Rupert was the one who'd been doing the bullying. When that statement came out, the social media reacted almost instantly to back Rupert. I don't know if you've noticed that, Peter.
Yes.
Instantly, social media was behind Rupert. Nigel had a window of opportunity there to say, right, this is Yusuf, and I'm distancing myself from that. You've got this wrong. You shouldn't have reported Rupert to the police, and you're sacked, and you're out. And he should have taken Rupert back into the fold at that point. He had a window of opportunity, but he didn't do that. He wrote the Sunday Telegraph article in which he impugned Rupert's mental faculties, or began to impugn them. And now he's gone, he's been doubling down in the last few days, really attacking Rupert. And so this is just going to go on and on and on. And I think people see Nigel for what he is, as I've described at the beginning of this program.
I want to sort of ask you, Ben, just broad questions really, looking at the immediate and then the medium term, if you like, and then the long term, in terms of, a political movement on the right or the right generally. Because what I've found over the past couple of days, talking to what they call normies, people sort of are not necessarily involved is the way we are, is one of utter dismay, right? So that they saw reform as being the one great, hope left, one glimmer of hope, and now they feel that's been extinguished. Almost, irrespective of whether they line up with Nigel or Rupert or whatever, but they sort of feel that it's kind of gone. It's no longer an option. What would you say to people who feel that? I mean, they do feel a real sense of kind of depression.
So I have great sympathy for them. I feel a great sense of depression too, as I no doubt you do, Peter, because we all know that the country is in deep trouble and we need a 180-degree change of direction. But the only solace, I think, here is that there are 4 years before the general election, and the so-called right, for which I read, people who believe in nation states, British culture, democracy, that sort of thing, quaint old-fashioned notions like that, so-called on the right of politics. The only solace I think they can take from it is that it's 4 years out from a general election, and that we needed to have this bust up because Nigel was occupying a space, in my view, falsely, giving hope to these people that he would be able to form a government and then deliver the country to safety. But there is no hope through Nigel. Nigel will not take on the Samsons required in the party, the big voices that would be required. It can't be done by one man. You need lots of different people, all very, very capable to achieve this end. And Nigel wouldn't have the ability to take them on because of his prickly, narcissistic nature. And more importantly, or equally importantly, is he actually doesn't have a political, philosophical framework. And now a lot of people listening to this will think, well, what's Ben talking about? He's been banging the drum for Brexit for years. Well, I think Brexit was a convenient whipping horse for him in order to maintain his position in the media limelight. But the reality is, and we've seen this in spades, and I know you're aware of it, over the last 6 months, Nigel has been pivoting, quite dramatically to the left. So we've heard him say things that are just astounding, like he's not worried about the rate of demographic change in the country, that he's not in favor of the detention and then deportation of all people who are in the country illegally, otherwise colloquially referred to as mass deportation. He thought it was perfectly reasonable to consider Shamima Begum coming back to the country. People have perhaps forgotten that. I mean, it's an absurd notion. Even Sajid Javid, who's a one nation wet Tory, was stronger on Shamima Begum than Nigel. Nigel has taken Nick Candy on as Treasurer of Reform. On the day that Nick Candy was revealed as Treasurer, he was singing the praises of Tony Blair and Peter Mandelson, the architect of the liberal global order to which this country has been subjected. He put forward Charlie Mullins as a candidate, who on the day that he was put forward as a candidate was saying he would still vote Remain. He wants to go back into the EU. A couple of days ago, he took on a Liberal Democrat councillor. And we've seen loads of Tories coming across to Reform without any vetting of their, political philosophy. And so Nigel ain't the man. And so people who are despondent should take some comfort from the fact that actually we would have perhaps done even more damage if we hadn't pointed out this problem at this stage, because we may just have delivered him into office and then he would have screwed the country. And so we've got to have this bust up now, and we've got to just hope, Peter, that people like yourself and others, myself and others, come together and we find a mechanism by which to deliver into government some really great people who genuinely believe in this country and who want to protect and promote and, first of all, save, and then protect and promote this country. That's what we need. We need to get the right people. And it's not about egos. Julia Hartley-Brooke, sorry to go back to, I had quite a bust up with her earlier. She says it's all about egos. It's not about egos. It's about one man's ego, which is Nigel. The rest of Rupert's not in, his dispute with Nigel is not because he's egotistical, nor is my dispute with Nigel because I'm egotistical. The minute this problem that the country faces is resolved or is heading in the right direction, let me tell you, Peter, I will be off the political stage. I don't enjoy politics. I do it because I bloomin' have to. I didn't want to stand in Wellingborough twice this year. I did it because I knew the impact I would make, even if I didn't win, would put Reform on the map. and which it did, by the way. Nigel likes to claim that it was all him. But, we're not in it for our egos. And I know you're not in it for your ego because we've discussed it. We're at a certain age, Peter, where we've been through life, where, aspiration for aspiration's sake and ambition is it's gone. We're just doing what we feel we're obliged to do because we feel it.
Actually, I quite agree on that front. It's interesting, there are a lot of people around much younger who also have this sense of obligation, actually. I mean, and they're kind of looking at a way of making it practical, in some way or shape or form. You mentioned there that about Nigel sort of tacking to the left or whatever on deportation, demographic change. I think that interview with Steve Edgerton certainly did make many people's ears prick up. But also after that, there was an interview with, I think it was Winston Marshall. And that's the one that actually made me worry rather, which was that where he said that in fact, essentially, if we take on political Islam, we will lose because essentially of the demographic changes happening anyway in Britain. That did seem to me to come rather out of the blue in some ways. And I sort of did strike me as being, no. It really gave me pause. I think I said that at the time. So it begs the question, first of all, I suppose I was asking about short, medium and long term. Let's start off on the short. What do you think should happen immediately now, Ben?
Now, what would be the ideal result of the dispute that's just taken place? I mean, the ideal result for me would be for Nigel to sack Yusuf, to democratize the party. And by democratizing the party, I don't mean just having the technical ability to remove the leader, but introducing processes, checks and balances, and into the party so that people like yourself and others who I would love to see on the front line of politics felt able to join the party so that this team of Samsons, if you like, can be created and the country can be saved. That would be the ideal result. Take Rupert back in. I don't mind if I'm in or out. That couldn't care less. But he's got to have the structure there to get the right people in. And there's so many good people. There's you, there's James Orr, Robert Jenrick, Suella Braverman. He can, create the structure which would welcome and take it and give these people confidence to join him. Yeah. And then, and instead of going out and doing all these, fireworky razzmatazz rallies, well, not instead of, in addition to that, doing some really very serious thinking on policies, making sure we've got really great candidates across the country who are going to be future parliamentarians and members of the civil service, because as a government you want to introduce, there's a lot of bloodletting that needs to take place in the civil service, and we've got to have people to replace those people. And then, and lastly, the drafting of legislation. We mustn't go into the next government, all thinking, right, we've won the election and now we can relax. The minute you get into government, you've got to hit that ground running, and we've got to have draft legislation ready to go, most of which I think is relatively straightforward to draft, because in my view, it's not about reform, small R reform. It's about restoration and repealing the last 27, 28 years of damaging statutes that have been put on our books by people from, Tony Blair onwards.
Well, you mentioned Zia Yusuf going, but what about Nigel? I mean, do you think he should go?
Well, I think if Nigel could have a moment of introspection, recognize that actually his political career and therefore his entire career is threatened by what he's doing at the moment. And if he could be made to see that actually restructuring reform would be not just in the country's interest, critically in the country's interest, but in his own personal interest, then I'm perfectly happy for him to stay. But unless he does all of that, of which, by the way, I think there's zero chance, but unless he does all of that, then, the whole thing's kaput anyway, isn't it? And there's no route through reform to saving this country, through capital R reform to saving this country, unless Nigel does all of that. He's got to do that. So that may be the ideal result. It's also the only result I think the country can hope for through reform. And in the absence of Nigel doing that, which I think is the probable outcome, if you see what he's been doing over the last 2 days, he's absolutely doubling down. He's giving no quarter. Yusuf has his complete support. In the absence of Nigel doing that, we need an alternative to reform. We need some other way to deliver the country from the precipice.
Yes, before I go on to that point, we, as you know, Ben, because you've spoken up, then we have locals branches here at the New Culture Forum, around the country. And, I took a very brief unscientific a survey of them, what they were thinking. Again, there was this sort of sense of dismay, but also there was sort of, they did, the one thing that came over loud and clear was this fear that somehow or other some new thing would sort of basically split a vote, would destroy the one chance we had. Now, what would you say to people who are saying that?
Well, I think the central point here is there is no chance through reform. Right. What are you splitting? There's nothing to split, because Nigel, if delivered into office, isn't going to save the country anyway. The Conservative Party, frankly, right now is speaking more sense than Nigel is. Chris Philp was actually pretty good the other day. Robert Jenrick is saying some stuff that's further right than Nigel. And when you've got the Conservative Party outflanking you, you've really got to ask yourself, is it worth supporting reform? With the Conservative Party outflanking reform, is it really worth supporting reform? And the other point I'd just make is it took about 1.5 years to put reform on the map. And that was all done, frankly, even though Nigel claimed, full responsibility for the, reform being its success to date. Actually, it was all done without Nigel. Nigel was offered GB News and on TV reality shows making money while that was done. And it was done by people like Richard Tice, like him or not, or, it was done by Richard Tice, David Bull, myself, Rupert Lowe, June Mummery, etc. And obviously all the grassroots, which I would like to return to in a second, the grassroots of reform, they're the ones who put the party on the map. We did it in 1.5 years. If Nigel is debunked, if his persona is debunked, as I believe it should be, then I think the creation of a new political force will happen quite quickly. The nation has been crying out for a pro-British agenda ever since 2016. And the nation has been repeatedly refused that political direction of travel. And they've been promised it, but they've been refused it. I think part of the reason, I'm digressing, but part of the reason we've been in such constitutional turmoil is because essentially our politicians haven't delivered what the people want. And I think if a genuine movement developed with demonstrably capable people saying the right things off the same political, philosophical hymn sheet, and who are seen to be able to deliver the country from the precipice, people will vote for them. I have no doubt about it. I've no doubt whatsoever we can get the brand awareness, for want of a better description, across the country, and that people will come out in droves to vote. In droves, they'll come out to vote, and they'll shun reform, and reform will be finished.
There have been it's hard to keep track quite, unless you are kind of a bit of a wonk in all the things people are saying. But what I have picked up, Ben, is that there's a talk of you and Rupert getting together and starting something new. Is that just a kind of suggestion from a third party at the moment, or is that a possibility? And also, for that matter, that there's interest from across the pond, Elon Musk.
But just dealing with the latter point first, there's no doubt that Elon Musk, who, whatever people might wish to say about his relationship with Donald Trump, speaks effectively for the Trump administration. Donald Trump didn't meet Nigel Farage when he went to the inauguration. Not only did Nigel not make it into the rotunda, he wasn't even met by Donald Trump. And nor did he meet Elon Musk. And as we all know, Elon Musk said Nigel wasn't the right man to lead reform. And I think if the body of people that I described were to emerge in some kind of coherent structure, then I'm certain it would have the support of the Trump administration. And that would be seismic.
Yes.
So far changes in the sort of so-called right wing of British politics has ended up being ever smaller fringe movements. But I think with where the British people are and with what's going on across the Atlantic, if that support were to come from across the Atlantic to a body of people, as I say, demonstrably capable of saving the country, then I think you'd be on the political map and public awareness in 5 seconds flat.
Yes. And the first part of the question as well, Ben, would you and Rupert start something?
For the last 6 months, I've been getting reports from across the country where Yusuf and Nigel Farage have been sacking and discrediting, or either forcing or forcing into resigning, the very grassroots movement that campaigned shoulder to shoulder with Rupert, me and others before Nigel entered the scene. And there are dozens and dozens and dozens of people who've experienced the same fate as Rupert and myself. We see Rupert very clearly, and we see me perhaps to a lesser extent now because my discrediting and sacking was earlier. But it's been happening to these people right across the board, and they have no voice, so no one knows it's been going on. But there's a whole movement there as well that could be picked up and activated, and I'm in touch with all of them. There's a whole movement there that could be picked up and activated overnight, and they will not join Reform. They will not support Nigel or Zia now because they've been absolutely trounced.
It was interesting, actually, with Yusuf. This man appeared, sort of almost out of nowhere, and somehow or other, he gave money to the party or whatever, but it's sort of still rather an unknown quantity, is he not?
He is, and when something doesn't add up, it means that we, the people, or even the politically engaged, haven't got the full story. There's something between Nigel and Zia about which we are not aware. You don't pluck a 38-year-old with nil political experience out of thin air and put him center stage and make him responsible for running your party unless there's something else going on. And we don't know what that is. It's not good, though. Yeah. There can be no good answer to why Zia Yusuf was plucked out of thin air and put in this pivotal position.
Ben, you mentioned the Tory party there. In some ways, because I know that you quite famously wanted to obliterate the Tory party, and then I think you said they're doing it themselves quite nicely. Thank you. And I've been hugely critical of the Tories myself, but they are sort of a factor, aren't they? They're a kind of factor, sort of sitting there at the moment, not doing very much, mainly because of a terrible leader. It seems to me. But where do you, if you can, over the next 4 years, what do you think could happen then with the Tory party? What if Jenrick maybe ended up taking over the Tory party? Would it be something that would interest you again, for example? I believe that Rupert actually didn't rule it out himself. I mean, or for that matter, any of us. Do you think the Tory party actually could, revive?
There's no reason why it couldn't revive. I mean, it's a phenomenal beast, as we all know, 200 years old or whatever it is. And it keeps, moving as required in order to survive. And so there's a good possibility it could survive. If the Tory party is banking on the destruction of Reform and for voters to float back to it, I think that's going to be a mistake for them. Because if Reform is, destroyed, as it were, or ceases to have the popularity that it's currently got, if it exits the political scene, then something else will emerge. Absolutely. Yeah. And if the sensible thing for the Conservative Party to do right now, which they won't do, but the sensible thing for them to do is to take Rupert Lowe on board straight away, put him in the shadow cabinet, make him shadow Home Secretary or something, give him a really pivotal position, and take on other people from our movement at the same time and give them demonstrably important positions. And then the electorate would look at the Conservative Party and say, wow, okay, reform isn't performing, but the Conservatives have suddenly rediscovered their small c conservatism. And but they won't do it. I suspect they won't do it. They won't do it. They won't have the courage to do it because they'll be fearful of losing the Liberal Democrat vote. And that's the problem that's hijacked the Conservative Party. And so we talked about the ideal outcome from all of this. I think the most probable outcome from all of this is that some other movement develops. And that movement either, as you say, splits the vote, which I would like to debate the notion of splitting the vote, because I don't think we're splitting anything in reality, but would take a chunk of votes, and by taking a chunk of votes becomes quite a determining factor in British politics. It doesn't actually have to win the popular vote to become a determining factor, and I think that will happen. I think that's the likely outcome, frankly.
Do you think, Ben, in conclusion, it's a big question maybe, but you came into politics late, as you have said. Are you more optimistic that we can save Britain now than maybe a few years ago, or are you more pessimistic?
No, I'm more optimistic now than I've ever been. I was very optimistic before Nigel came back as leader. I thought that reform was going to occupy that space, and I didn't want Nigel back for all the reasons we've just gone through. I was aware of Nigel's persona. We were all aware of Nigel's persona. I was aware of the real Nigel. And so I didn't want him back as leader. And that's why I banged the drum for democratization when he did come back, because it became a critical issue. But before the general election, I was very confident that we were going to win seats in the general election and that we could go on with Richard Tice. One thing Richard Tice understood was building a broad and deep team. He knew he needed that. And that's what matters. All I've talked about in terms of saving the country is creating that team. That's what matters. Richard got it. When Nigel came back, I was despondent. I was despondent, not because of being bitter and twisted as Nigel tried to paint me, but because I knew Nigel wasn't the man. Then I was extremely happy, and I still am, and I'm incredibly optimistic as a result of Trump's victory across the Atlantic. I know some of his policies are going to hurt the United Kingdom, but frankly, we need to be hurt in order to wake up and realize we've got to be doing the same things. He's making America great again. We've got to make the United Kingdom great again. So that's very encouraging. And actually, these latest developments with Nigel are encouraging, because Nigel, left to his own devices, if this bust up hadn't happened, by the way, it would have eventually happened, because that's just the nature of Nigel. But if this bust up hadn't happened, we would still be laboring under the illusion that Nigel was going to save us. And that would have been very dangerous, because I say, if we put him into office and then he'd just done what I suspect he would do, which is not do anything positive for the country, we'd be in real deep doo-doo. But we're going to have this debate now. This scrap is going to play out now, 4 years out from an election. So we've got the the support for our agenda from across the Atlantic. And I think the movement will now wake up and produce a leader. It doesn't matter whether it's Rupert or someone else, or Rupert's great, and take forward that movement. So I'm very optimistic. Actually, I think this is all great for the future of the country.
Well, look, Ben, thank you so much. I mean, for talking to us. I know you've been doing it pretty much back to back this week, but thank you very much.
No, thank you.
Ben.
Thank you for giving me the opportunity.
No, it's a pleasure. That's it, actually, for this week. And thank you very much to Ben Habib there. And we shall see you next time. In the meantime, have a good time, won't you, this week? Bye. Our mission at the New Culture Forum is and always has been to defend and celebrate Britain's history, culture, and its people, and indeed Western civilization, at a time when both are under sustained attack. We have grown from small beginnings to become the country's most influential right-leaning cultural think tank. Our content is watched and read by some of Britain's most influential political figures. But now, we need your help. If you believe in what we do, then please do become a member. For as little as £4 a month, you can make a vital contribution to what we do. As a member of the NCF family, you will help ensure that we can continue to produce quality content online, such as our 3 weekly programs, Whittle, which is our flagship interview show, Newspeak, our panel discussion show, and Deprogrammed, which is targeted at Britain's youth. As you probably know, in addition, we produce important documentaries, such as our critically acclaimed 6-part series, The West, a stunning celebration of the history and genius of Western civilization, and our ongoing documentary series, Heresies, with hard-hitting episodes tackling subjects such as immigration, gender ideology, and BBC bias. But the New Culture Forum is much more than a YouTube channel. We don't just complain about Britain as it is, we provide real solutions and clear policies on how we can push back against the madness and restore sanity to this nation. Our presenters are now highly sought after and have become familiar faces across the media. Our prestigious annual Smith Lecture and our regional and indeed national conferences have attracted world-class speakers. Perhaps most importantly, we are the only organisation on the right of politics that has launched a national movement without actually being a political party. And uniquely, through our NCF Locals programme, we've established some 30 active branches in towns and cities right across the nation, from Edinburgh to Exeter, and with many more on the way. We're very proud of what we've achieved, and our members have made it possible. In return, our members receive access to exclusive content, invitations to private events, free or discounted tickets to our conferences and lectures, free copies of our books, and much more. I very much hope that you'll join us too by clicking the link in the description or going to our website, newcultureforum.org.uk. Now is the time that we need your help. Thank you.